morning, everybody. How are you today? Yeah? Is everybody with us? I'm so happy to see this room full. You know, I've been at this work, diversity and inclusion, specifically in tech, for over 20 years, and I'm so used to speaking to empty rooms. The first 18 years were like empty rooms, and in the last few years, I'm so pleased that this conversation has gained traction, and I'm especially pleased, thank you, Megan, for having us here today, because we get to talk to a group of folks that we normally don't get to talk to. I know that we're not supposed to say IT professionals. Isn't that what the first speaker said? So define yourselves as you will, but I speak a lot to a lot of tech crowds, but very rarely to folks who are so deep into problem identification and problem solutions. You all solve problems every single day, and there are things I'm sure that sometimes you wouldn't have been able to anticipate the day before. And I love solving problems, and I love making the case for diversity and inclusion, in part because it is entirely about problem identification and problem solving. So you may have seen recent data that says that teams that are diverse and have inclusive culture outperform their competition. And this is true. Outperforms them on everything from retention to revenue. And the big punchline here that I want folks to understand is that the benefit for diversity and inclusion, especially in tech, is not actually about problem solving, but it's about problem identification. Because we're all people who can solve problems that are presented to us, and as soon as we identify them, we know what to do next. The real problem is the ones that we don't know exist. And what diversity and inclusion does is it brings a whole new set of perspectives onto an institution, a system, whatever it is, a piece of software, that brings the lived experience for people from many different backgrounds so that they can look at it and go, you know what? This actually isn't going to work for this community. This isn't going to work in this language. This isn't going to work for this group of people. And once you know that, you can solve the problem. And so diversity and inclusion isn't simply a nice thing to have. It's actually a critical point for taking our companies and our work into the future, because this is where innovation is going to come from. If you work at a company where most of the people have very similar backgrounds along a lot of lines, it's not just race, it's not just gender, it's not just socioeconomic background or educational experience, although those are very big indicators of a lot of things. But if you mostly work with people who have a lot in common with you, you're going to miss your opportunity for innovation into the next generation. And that's one of the things that tech companies are finally starting to embrace, that it is about the moral argument, because we should be opening our doors to people from lots of different backgrounds, but it is also a strong business case, not just on revenue, but on innovation. And in spite of our best efforts as a sector, we're still looking at rates of inclusion just along race that are still in the single digits for non-white folks, except for Asian folks. So for Black, Latino, Native American, et cetera, we're still looking at single-digit representation in our tech companies when we know the demographics, at least of this country, are going to change dramatically and have been changing dramatically. And by the year 2040, people of color will be in the majority. And so as we're building whatever we're building, and as we're solving whatever technical problems we have to solve, we have to be thinking about the future, not just the present. And the thing that frustrates me most about this work, and why I'm so happy to be here today talking with the panel that I'm going to bring up in a second, is that the answers are actually knowable. How we do diversity and inclusion, how we build diversity into our companies is knowable, it's proven, there's data, there's research behind how you do it. And one of the frustrating things about this work is that I'm often asked to come and speak, and I have to keep things abstract. And the best part about this panel is that we're going to not be abstract at all. We're going to talk about real solutions that real companies are implementing to move the needle on diversity and inclusion. And I just want to reassure people in this room, as big of an issue as diversity and inclusion may feel, it is not reduced to a hashtag. There is no silver bullet. There is no magic wand that somebody can wave and say, oh, look, we all get along. Look, we're all different colors of the rainbow. We're a Benetton ad. That's not actually what we're looking for. We're looking for people who want to come in and work together and have creative tension and bring their lived experiences in the name of innovation. Because if tech doesn't figure this out, the things that we are building are going to increasingly be irrelevant for the people using what we're building. And that's the big bottom line here. So I'm super excited to bring out 3 people who are working specifically on solutions in their own companies. What's going to happen is they're going to come out, have a seat, and then they're each going to give a quick presentation. So let me bring them out real quick. Please help me welcome Aubrey Blanche, Brigid Tabour, and Heather Doshay. So come on out. So each of these fine diversity and inclusion practitioners is going to come up and they're going to talk to you briefly about some specific intervention that's working at their company where they have seen improvement on diversity and inclusion. We want to get right to solutions and get out of the abstract. And the first person I'd like to bring up is the head of global diversity and inclusion at Atlassian, Aubrey Blanche.
Hey everyone, I'm so excited to be here. So like I said, I'm Aubrey. I'm a technologist, I'm a strategist, and I'm also help making Jira better for those of you who love Jira. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the way that Atlassian has redesigned our talent acquisition processes to both raise the bar and bring more balance to our teams. So what we often hear when I come in and I say, hey, we're going to build more diversity, people say, we don't want to lower the bar. I'm here to tell you from an empirical and a mathematical point of view, homogeneity is a sign of inconsistent, lazy, or low standards, and that diversity in and of itself is an outcome that you get when you have consistent, excellent, standardized processes. So awesome. I came to Atlassian about 3 years ago, and I'm a trained social science researcher, and so that's how we've taken this approach. So I'm going to talk to you about how we've redesigned our graduate and intern recruiting processes to help us build a more balanced team and make sure that we're bringing in the right talent for Atlassian. So in July 2015, I came in, and our stats, this is our global technical population. So we are based in Sydney and have engineers and other technical folks all over the world. For this presentation, I am going to talk about gender quite a bit because I have globally consistent data. But I want to say that all of my recommendations also benefit other underrepresented populations. So thinking about underrepresented people of color, folks over 40, things like that. And I'll talk about some of the impact there too. So this number is not great. It's not even market availability. So we dug into the research and said what types of procedures and processes can help us more accurately and objectively evaluate the talent we're bringing in. And we landed on 3 solutions. So first, use standardized interviews. This doesn't sound like rocket surgery, right? Make sure you ask everyone the same question. But it turned out that this wasn't necessarily something we were doing consistently. Second, we rolled out a specific, tailored, unconscious bias training to our hiring community. Now, I want to say this with a word of caution. If you think that rolling out an unconscious bias training to your workforce is a good idea, you're probably wrong, unless you are willing to pair that with a comprehensive audit strategy that helps identify bias in all of your programs and processes. So just a training by itself will actually probably do more harm than good. And the third thing that we did was we got rid of culture fit, which the research tells us is really just an intractable morass of our unconscious biases and personal preferences that have nothing to do with talent. And so we built a standardized, specifically behavioral values alignment interview. We took our corporate values, things like open company, no bullshit, and play as a team, and looked for folks who embodied those qualities. So things like, will you go above and beyond for your teammate? Will you speak directly but kindly about problems and solutions that need to happen? And we were so excited, built a new process, put up our job recs online. Fuck. 0 female applicants. So I was a little worried about keeping my job. But it turns out that there were other systemic problems in play. And I say systemic on purpose because traditional D&I looks at individual programs that you can implement. And what we've done is looked at the interlapping systems that systematically exclude or devalue folks from those underrepresented groups. So we called some friends. In this case, we called Textio, which is an augmented AI-backed writing platform that helps identify the impact of language, both on who applies to your jobs, how qualified that talent is, and what groups they come from. And what Textio shows, for example, is that job listings that have stronger equal opportunity language actually fill 10 times faster across demographic groups with higher quality candidates. And shockingly, we're a global company. It turns out that the impact of that EEO language is great in the US, but even greater in non-US territories. Why? Because it's not a standard practice. It turns out that cliches fare worse with people of color. Why? Because this implicitly shows that this language, which was developed in predominantly white spaces, says, you might not belong here, you might not thrive. We also used Textio to edit our job ads. We did a comprehensive overhaul of our career pages because, as you can imagine, when you have more dogs than people of color on your careers page, that says something pretty strong about where your values are, right? Everyone's like Googling now. It also provided our recruiters with real-time feedback. So not only were we fixing the problem, we were preventing future issues because folks were learning about the impact of their language and how subtle tweaks could change who applies for open roles. And so we did this in 2017, having rolled out all of these procedures. 57% of our technical interns and graduates across all of our territories identified as female. And 33% of them, based in the United States, identified as Black or Latinx. So what I am telling you is the pipeline problem might exist in some specialties, but science can solve it for you, and there is a competitive advantage. Now, I've talked here about our graduate program. The impact that we've seen in our experienced hiring is that we've increased our hiring of women in technical roles by 80% over the last 3 years, improved the representation of folks over 40 by 25%, and also tripled the representation of Black and Hispanic engineers across our global workforce. So thank you so much. I'm excited to see what you'll do.
Good morning. My name is Bridget, and I am a partner at our Digital and Emerging Technology practice at EY. And I'm here to talk about the importance of sponsorship in the advancement of women. So first, I'm going to start with a very sobering picture and statistic, which is on our Women Fast Forward page. The 2017 World Economic Gender Gap report that came out said it's going to be 217 years before we achieve gender parity. That's not acceptable. It's easy to look at these numbers and take a defeatist attitude, but every day, every month, every week, every year we take off this makes a difference. So let's talk about the action that we can do. At EY, we believe gender diversity is good not just for business, but also for the overall economy. We're a strong believer in the concept of 30%. And what that means is for women to have a voice, we need 30% of those positions in senior leadership to be women. And it's not just about women. Organizations with 30% female leaders or more actually have better profits based on our research. This doesn't happen on its own, though. It requires action. So let's talk about how we make that happen. Both externally and internally at EY, we focus on a number of different programs, spanning everything from women athletes to women in business to women in government. Internally, we have networking programs. We have a program called Power, Purpose, Presence, which is focused on taking our senior managers up to the rank of partner. And we have something in our Women in Technology program that I want to focus on today, which is the concept of sponsorship. First, you have to recruit. Second, you have to retain. And third, you have to promote. So before we talk about the importance of sponsorship, let me set some boundaries. Sponsorship is an earned reciprocal relationship that is necessary for upward mobility. It is not mentoring. It is not someone simply just giving you advice. Sponsors expend their own personal capital to help you get what you need and help you advance. Mentors help you take responsibility for your own career. Sponsors have the power to help influence on your behalf. Mentors help influence you. Sponsors provide those opportunities. They open the doors. Mentors provide guidance on how to take advantage of those opportunities once you receive them. Sponsors will ask the tough questions on your behalf and protect you, whereas mentors will ask you the tough questions directly to you. Effectively, sponsors stand in front of you and talk about you, where a mentor stands beside you and talks with you. So why is it so important? Sponsors impact progression. Individuals who have sponsors are 65% happier with their own level of progression. Sponsors impact retention. We found at EY the biggest impacts that we've seen are in our working mothers, where 85% will choose to stay in the workforce and continue to ask for those promotions with a sponsor. We've also seen, regardless of gender, people of color 57% less likely to leave within a year when they have a sponsor. And most importantly, sponsors build confidence. Once you have those opportunities, more women are willing to actually ask for them and seek them out. So if you don't have a sponsor, how can you find one? First and foremost, understand your own strengths and weaknesses. Do a bit of a self-diagnostic. Second, look at your organization and outside your organization for sponsors. A sponsor must be someone in power who can actually make a difference and open that door for you. It is okay to have more than one sponsor. We actually suggest 2 internal and 1 external as a rule of thumb. It's not all about you. It is a two-way discussion. Understand what you will bring to this partnership and ask for what you want. 4, deliver results. Make it easy for your sponsor to tell the story about you based on the fact that you can deliver. Next, what is your personal brand? In the world of consulting, I always want to know what someone is known for, whether it's a technology or an industry or a particular client. And this may change over time, but understand what it is and self-promote. Executive presence, speak with confidence, be authentic. And finally, nail the tactics. You need to do a bit of self-promotion here and raise your internal and external visibility. In closing, if you don't have a sponsor, look for one and ask for one. If you are in a position of power, sponsor the high-performing women within your organization. Together, we can all press for progress. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Doshay, and I'm the VP of People at Rainforest QA. The way we build software has evolved, but the way we do QA hasn't. We're helping solve QA through our platform that offers web, mobile, and exploratory testing at the speed of continuous delivery. A bit about our internal team. We're about 100 or so people globally, with about 27% of our team being remote, international, and the rest of us here in San Francisco. We're growing fast on the people side, increasing about 50% year over year. But we have this problem. In our monthly engagement surveys, we found that our remote people were actually less engaged than our on-site people. And this mirrors the problem that we see in the national data, with Gallup showing dismal results all around, but more so for remote people than on-site counterparts. And this matters a ton because remote workforce is growing at an exponential rate relative to their on-site counterpart. And it matters the most for the people in this room. How many of you here would consider yourself part of the computer and mathematical job category in these broad categories? I would say at least half, right? Probably more. And how many of you work maybe remote, maybe 50% time or more? About 15, 20%? Cool. So this matters for companies where there are remote people. When you think about who the remote pipeline is, it's working parents, it's women, it's the older populations, it's international folks, right? And so when we're thinking about how we kind of get that pipeline for diversity on our teams, here it is. It's your remote workforce. And so while Rainforest is really proud of the fact that we have this remote workforce, we feel that by creating an equitable workplace for them, we're actually inherently improving conditions for a segment of the workforce that is diverse. That said, we weren't doing it so great. We saw those numbers, right? 8.2 to 9.0. And so we decided to do a lot of different interventions to try and see what we could make work. And I want to share with you just one program that had a massive impact. Basically, it's called Remote Week. And the best part, $0 and less than 5 hours to plan. So anyone can do this. How we did it was just 3 simple steps, and I'll walk you through them now. The first step is that we did a pre-survey. And what we took was this thing called the Life Labs Remote Experience Audit, which is free and available online. You can find the link right there. And basically what it does is it indexes all the things that are really important to remote work. And if companies are doing it well, they're doing all these things. And we asked our team, how well are we doing these things? And then we asked each group to get split up. So we took all of our on-site employees and we said, hey, you go remote in this week, you go remote in this week, you can go wherever you want. And the idea was we wanted it to really mimic the realities of someone in a distributed workforce. So by going remote while some of your team is still on site, you know what it's like to be in the room or on the screen when the rest of the team is in the room. And by going somewhere else, say visiting a friend or colleague or family member in another country, you could actually experience a different time zone, which is the reality for our team. And then we did a post-survey. We asked the exact same questions as the pre-survey, and what we were looking for is a change in scores. We asked the team for ideas and insights for how to improve our remote life. And then, of course, what I wanted to know was, would the remote scores go up in the next monthly engagement survey? So I predicted that the scores would go down in the post-survey, that Life Lab survey, but people would have so many ideas of all the things we could be doing better. But what actually happened was, by doing this activity, people felt empathy and appreciation on both sides, whether they were remote or on-site, typically, and that alone improved the perception of how well we do remote work. So engaging in empathy activities and empathy-building activities have a massive impact. Just a couple scores to share. Acknowledgement is a big area of concern for people in the remote world, feeling like they're invisible in the workplace, and scores went up there. Scores also went up in learning and development, which is my personal passion area. And a lot of times people think if you're remote, you don't have the same access to learning opportunities that will help you build your career. And we found that it went up 18% in doing this one program. But of course, these are perceptions. What I wanted to know was actual results. So on the engagement side, not only did the remote scores go up, but they equalized exactly the same. So our remote people were having an equitable, true equitable experience to their on-site people. And the most exciting is that when we did promotions the following spring, so as a side note, this program was in November of last year. We did promotions in the spring, and our remote people were actually promoted at a higher rate than the on-site counterparts. And so it's actually changing the honest-to-goodness outcomes of how our team operates just by building empathy for a different experience. And so if you're thinking about, entering a remote workforce or building a distributed team, or you're struggling to retain diverse talent, really consider out-of-the-box programs that help build empathy for the experience of people that are other than the majority. And you'll find you can have great outcomes with very little dollars. So thank you so much.
So the thing you should know is that each of these people cut down a half-hour talk into 5 minutes. So if you want to talk to them after, you definitely should. If you want to have them at your events, come talk to your team, your company, you definitely should, because each of these is a very complex program. But what I love about it is that we've got one that focuses on hiring, we've got one that focuses on day-to-day interaction between remote and on-site folks, and we've got one that focuses on promotion, and these are all very important parts of the diversity and inclusion puzzle that we have to put together. The other thing I love is that we're no longer talking so much about why diversity and inclusion is important. We're just asserting that it is and moving forward with it, and then showing great results as a result of the work that we're doing. So Aubrey, I'm going to start with you, because you're a big data person, and you and I love to talk about measurements of impact on programs. But I was hoping you can give us an anecdotal piece of evidence around when you knew this was starting to work that isn't about a piece of data.
Yeah, so all I love is my spreadsheets and my R code. But no, I think the thing for me is when I became kind of useless means that it's a good thing. And what I mean by that is sort of I came in, developed strategies, we started building tactical programs off of that. And I hear from my recruiters, hey, by the way, we're doing this thing. I built a library of search strings that everyone else on the team can use to make sure that we're accessing Black and African talent. I'm like, I didn't tell you to do that. And they're like, well, no, but we want to build a balanced candidate pipeline. I just had we have an engineer on our Stride team. So Stride is our chat collaboration product. And one of the things that came up for some of our female engineers who tend to be very underrepresented on their teams, even with our progress, is the phrase like, hey guys, right? It's like, okay, but I'm not. But she also recognized, she had asked her team, hey, can you try to work on this? And they had said, yeah, we're willing to, but it's actually really hard. This is our vernacular and it's very common. So she built a Stride bot called NudgeBot. And what it does is when you say, hey guys, in a room, in a Stride room, it'll say, did you mean team or folks or posse or crew? And so it's a way for, she had empathy for the fact that they're trying to help, but also they understood that it was something that was important to her, and she sort of went and built it, and now it's used by like hundreds of teams all over the company. And what's really cool about it is it's that interruptive technology. So now we'll even get like in meetings, someone will be like, hey guys, wait, team. But that's really magic because it's not something that I did because I'm not close enough to those problems day to day to solve them. And so I always get excited when I'm like, I am becoming useless and might need to get a new job soon, right? Like that's a good thing.
Yeah. That's really cool. And it's also those day-to-day habits that start to permeate everything where it feels like it's not a big deal to begin with, and then you start to realize as it is a big deal to some people, it's not that hard to practice and just adjust. It's not the most important issue in the room necessarily, but it's important enough that she went and wrote some code to create NudgeBot that has now affected the culture of the company, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. And I think the cool thing also is we're working on getting it into the Atlassian marketplace. So all of you on Stride, or who should be, will be hopefully offering that to our customers too.
Cool, that's great. And then I think this takes me to a question for Brigid, which is, I think a lot of folks often think that it has to be an exact match. Like black folks need to be advocating only for black folks, and women from all backgrounds need to be advocating for women. And in the sponsorship model, I think there's a misconception about who can sponsor whom. And you and I were talking a little bit about this backstage. Can you talk about your own experience being sponsored and what that was like and who sponsored you?
Absolutely. So if you think about who is normally in a boardroom, you've seen plenty of pictures. It is predominantly white men. So the obvious question is, well, then do I need to find that one woman to sponsor me? No. Plain and simple. It is very likely, actually, to be a white man that is sponsoring you. The most important thing is that it is a person in a position of power who will speak about you. Over the course of my career, I'd say I'd probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 active sponsors. 9 of those were men, and 1 was a woman, right? And they have each provided different aspects of helping me through my career growth. The first one was actually pushing me to say, hey, isn't it time for you to get promoted? Do you really want to stay at senior manager your whole career, or do you want to move up? And then when I had that conversation with him, he said, all right, I will help you find the right opportunity. So he was out there talking about how great Brigid was, right? I didn't feel comfortable talking about myself in that light, but he put me out there. And when he heard of those opportunities, he said, well, why not Brigid, right? And so those are the types of things to look for in a sponsor. It's not someone like you. As a matter of fact, I would say that it is often someone who's not like you, but who can help you.
Right, and the research actually bears this out quite nicely, that says, look, what you need is someone, and their position is more important than their identity, and that actually works across race and ethnicity lines and gender lines and age lines, that it is definitely about the person who has the authority to speak for you and to advocate for you. And that's a myth that I think we need to bust, because quite honestly, often being the only woman executive in a room, I can't, right? And the one woman on an executive team can't do all the heavy lifting. And the one person of color, and if you're the one woman of color who's both the only woman and the only person of color in the room, which I've often found myself to be, I just don't have the bandwidth to do that. And this is where we need other people to start doing the heavy lifting. This is why it's an issue for all of us to dig into, not just those of us who have identities that are from underrepresented backgrounds. Heather, while we're talking about leadership, one of the things that always fascinates me about doing good D&I work is how to enroll leadership and where that gets tricky, and how do you go about taking on something that's actually, the remote week is pretty radical, because you're really disrupting workflow when you try and implement it. And I'm wondering how you got people bought into something that's potentially so disruptive.
That's a great question. I find that, especially because we're at a startup, right? Our whole foundation and roots are in experimentation and risk-taking and all those things. And so if that's our culture, that's what we got founded on, can we use that same kind of mentality and bring it towards our programs around diversity and inclusion? And so I kind of, position everything as, this is an experiment. I want you to bear with me. We're going to try it this time, and we're going to measure everything so you know if it's effective or not. And if it's not, we're not going to do it again. And so kind of managers can sometimes be a little biased, and people in general have these biases around are remote people as productive as on-site people? If we can't see them, are they actually doing work? And what we find actually in studies is that it's the opposite, and that remote people work a lot harder because they're fear of not being noticed. And so just kind of sharing that data and getting people on board with the idea of an experiment. We'll do it one time, and then we won't do it again if it doesn't work. I can tell you the second time around, we're doing it right now. Nobody questioned it. And so it's really about saying, hey, like we're not saying we're going to change things forever. We're going to try this thing once, and we'll let you know how it goes. And if you don't like it, if it's not working, we don't have to do it again.
That's great. I think that folks are often surprised to know that diversity and inclusion initiatives are much like product launches, or when somebody has an idea for some new offering, that it needs the same level of resources on it, that you need to get leadership enrolled, you got to get budget for it, you got to identify the problem that you're trying to solve with precision, you have to enroll the company in it, you have to socialize it. All of those things are true with diversity and inclusion programs as well. And so one of the hardest things to do is go into a company as a consultant like I am, and they say, okay, great, we have 1,000 employees, and we want you to help us with diversity and inclusion, and we've set aside $10,000. And you go, I don't know how to, I mean, I can start there, but we need to start moving these projects into a much different category, that these have to be seen as really big undertakings as much as anything else that a company would take on, a software company, a consultancy, it doesn't matter what. In that vein, what are you working on next? What's the next problem you want to tackle, and how you think you're going to tackle it? Let's start with Aubrey.
Yeah, so my two big things are, over the last couple of years, we've sort of made a strategic choice to focus on cultural transformation, and specifically thinking about how Black and Latinx folks sort of experience our culture and our environment. And so over the next sort of 18 months, I'm finally getting to do what I've been wanting to do for a while, which is hit the gas on volume recruiting. Because we feel like we've made enough evolution there that we think there's space for that sort of cultural transformation. But very much figuring out, because what we're finding is, especially with folks from the African diaspora, that a lot of the strategies and engagement sort of tactics that we've had are just very different and specialized for that community. And so we're really upscaling our talent acquisition and hiring communities to understand how to create a great candidate experience for those folks.
Very cool. Happy to help. Oh, right there.
If you have friends, let me know. We have jobs.
Brigid, what about you?
Absolutely. So one of the things EY has really made a position about is the gender equality in pay. And Heather and I were talking backstage, and apparently this was really driven by the state of California saying we cannot ask people any longer what they currently make. One of the studies that we've seen in the past is that inherently, starting at an entry level, women don't negotiate their salary as high. So then 25 years in, the differences are about doubled, right? And it may have only been $4,000 difference at the beginning, but now over the course of a career, it's a pretty major issue. So by saying, you know what, actually nationwide and worldwide, we are no longer going to ask anyone. We are going to look at the position, a person's background, and make an offer, and we are going to continue to look every single year to say, do we actually have a gap at like levels? So that is really important for me, and it was really important for our entire organization.
It's great. And in a lot of ways, for those of you who aren't from the States, the UK and Norway are really leading the way on pay transparency around gender gaps. And so if you're interested in pay discrepancy along gender, really look at what those two municipalities, it's not a single government, but the UK and Norway are doing around pay transparency and gender.
Yeah.
And Heather, how about you?
So many things. As a startup, there's so many things to do. The mountain is this high. And now that I've seen a sponsorship talk, I kind of want to do that too. But one thing that we're working on right now, we just hired our first sourcer, and I've actually titled the job Diversity Talent Sourcer, which in just titling it that way, you've got a more diverse pool of sourcers. But my take is that if there's a pipeline problem that everyone claims to have, like let's make the solution around that. And so from a hiring perspective, we will only ever hire sourcers that are focused on diversity, and we'll let the inbound come as it does, but we're going to build our pipeline if it doesn't exist. And so that's something I'm really excited about. Our first diversity sourcer starts on May 17th, so we should see great things coming hopefully by June 1.
That's great. And I just wrote a piece talking about how Black women in America are the most educated, formally educated group along race and gender lines, and the least represented among corporate ranks. And so it's a really important gap to close, just along those lines specifically. Listen, I want to thank you all. I know we breezed through so much there. If you want to find anybody on this panel, you can reach them through me. You can find me most easily on Twitter, NM Sanchez, and I'm happy to connect you with any of these lovely folks who are doing great work. Thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge with us today.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks.
Yeah.